He was already in the middle of a sentence when it started. Not dramatically, not with any signal, just mid-sentence, mid-thought, the way most things begin that you don't notice until much later. He was talking about technique, about how most people misunderstand it, about how even experienced practitioners carry the wrong ideas for years, sometimes their whole lives, and never realize it. He had a way of speaking that suggested he had thought about this longer than you had, that he had already arrived somewhere you were still walking toward. His voice was even, measured, comfortable in the way that a voice gets comfortable when it has rarely been challenged in a room. There were maybe 4 or 5 others nearby, not seated in any formal arrangement, just present. The way people are present in a space between one thing and another, between a session ending and the next one beginning. The light in the room was flat, afternoon light, nothing sharp about it. A window somewhere behind them. The floor was wood, old wood, slightly uneven, the kind of floor that holds sound differently in different spots. He was standing near the center, not self-consciously. It was just where he had ended up, and from there, his voice carried easily. Bruce Lee was to the side, not far, not positioned in any deliberate way. He was simply there, where he had been, standing with the kind of stillness that does not announce itself, not tense, not relaxed in any performed sense, just still. The way a thing is still when it has no particular reason to move. He was not looking at the speaker directly. His gaze went somewhere between the speaker and the middle distance. Not avoidance, not attention, just presence without direction. The speaker did not seem to notice, or, if he noticed, it did not register as anything requiring adjustment. He continued. He was explaining a principle, something about weight distribution, about how the body's relationship to the ground determines everything that happens above it. He used specific language. He was careful with his words in the way that people are careful when they feel they have earned the right to be specific. He gestured once, a small gesture, fingers moving to indicate a line of force, a vector, something invisible but real. His audience listened without interruption. No one challenged the premise. No one asked for clarification. The words filled the room at a steady, unhurried pace, and Bruce Lee said nothing, which was not, at first, unusual. People say nothing all the time. Silence in the background is the default. The speaker was not speaking to Bruce Lee specifically. He was speaking generally, to the room. So there was no particular reason for Bruce Lee to respond. But there was something in the quality of the silence that was different, difficult to name, not aggressive, not dismissive, just a silence that had weight to it, that took up space. The way certain objects take up more visual space than their actual dimensions would suggest. The speaker kept going. He moved to a second idea, connected to the first, about intention preceding movement, about how the body telegraphs what the mind decides before the decision is conscious. He had seen this in others. He had worked to remove it from himself. He described the process briefly, the years of attention it had required, the specific moments of recognition when he understood something he had previously only approximated. Still nothing from the side. No agreement. No small sound of acknowledgement. No shift in posture that might suggest engagement. Bruce Lee remained exactly as he was, looking at no precise thing, breathing in a way that was barely visible, present and entirely unreactive. The speaker paused for the first time. It was a small pause, the kind built into natural speech, the space between a completed thought and the beginning of the next. But it lasted a fraction longer than it needed to, and in that fraction, something passed across the speaker's face. Not an expression, more like the absence of the expression that had been there, a slight reset. Then he continued. He was now talking about a specific kind of error. He had seen it often. A practitioner who develops technical proficiency but loses contact with the underlying principle. Who can perform the form correctly and yet misses the point entirely? He described this with some precision. He was not unkind about it. He was clinical, observational. The way someone describes a phenomenon they have studied rather than judged. His eyes moved briefly to the side. Not long. A glance. The kind of glance that does not want to be a glance, that wants to be something else. A casual survey of the room, perhaps. A natural wandering of attention. But it landed where it landed, on Bruce Lee, and then moved away again, back to the middle of the room, back to the general audience. Bruce Lee had not moved, had not reacted to being looked at, had not acknowledged the glance, had not, in any visible way, registered that anything had happened at all. The speaker continued. His voice had the same quality as before, mostly, even, measured. But something in the rhythm had shifted slightly. He was speaking at a slightly higher rate, not fast, not rushed in any way that could be pointed to. But the spaces between words had compressed just slightly, as if the air in the room had thinned and words needed to fill more of it. He made a point, then made it again, from a different angle. Not because the first version was unclear, because he was not sure if the first version had landed. That was the feeling. Not consciously formed, but present. A faint uncertainty about whether what he was saying was being received in the way it was intended. And so, he circled back, restated, offered another approach to the same idea. The others in the room were quieter now. This was not a dramatic change. No one had stopped doing something to pay attention. No one had turned, but there had been small sounds before. The ambient sounds of people sharing a space, the brief adjustments of weight, the small unconscious utterances that fill the edges of a conversation, and those had become less. Not absent, just less. The room had, in some small way, contracted. Bruce Lee had not moved. He stood, with his weight settled, not heavily, with the easy distribution of someone who does not need to think about how they are standing. His arms were not crossed. They were just there, at his sides, slightly forward of neutral, the way arms rest when a body is completely unguarded. His jaw was relaxed. His eyes continued to look at the near middle distance, at the room, without looking at any specific thing in the room. He was not ignoring the speaker. That was not quite it. Ignoring requires a decision, a turn away from something. This was different. This was the absence of the turn toward, just being in a room where someone was speaking. The speaker said the word precision. He said it, and then said it again a moment later, embedded in a slightly different sentence. He said that precision is not the same as correctness, that you can be correct in form and imprecise in application. He was building something, a distinction, a structure of ideas that had a logic to it. He was not wrong. His thinking was clear. His observations were real. But something was happening to the delivery. His voice, still controlled, had a quality now of filling rather than conveying, as if the space required something and he was providing it. Not from abundance, but from necessity. The words were coming because the silence needed to be addressed, and they were the tool available for addressing it. He paused again. This pause was longer, long enough that one of the others nearby glanced up briefly, not at anyone in particular, just upward, toward the sound, or toward the absence of sound, then back down. The speaker cleared his throat, very lightly, the kind of clearing that has nothing to do with the throat. He started again. He said, "The principle operates at every level." He said it as if he had been planning to say it, as if it were the next point in a sequence he had intended all along. His voice was slightly lower than it had been, not much, a register, the way a voice drops when it moves from demonstration to conviction. Bruce Lee's eyes moved, slightly, to the left, then back, not to the speaker, not away from the speaker with any particular purpose, just a small, involuntary drift of attention, or the appearance of one, and then a return to the same unfocused middle distance. The movement was less than a second, barely a movement at all. It might not have been noticeable. The speaker noticed it, not consciously, but his sentence changed direction mid-thought. He had been going somewhere, and then, in the space of that eye movement, he went somewhere adjacent instead. He recovered smoothly. From the outside, it sounded like a natural development. But the original sentence had been abandoned, left unfinished, technically, though he had moved away from it so naturally that the unfinished quality was almost invisible. He was talking about the same subject, but approaching it from outside now, describing what it looks like from the perspective of someone watching rather than doing. He had shifted from participant to observer within his own explanation. This was not deliberate. It was the kind of shift that happens when the ground under a thought becomes uncertain. His hands moved again, a different gesture than before, less precise, more a gesture of encompassing, of broadening, of saying, all of this, you understand, all of it connects. The gesture that people use when the specific words have become harder to find. The others had become very still, not rigidly, not in any way that could be pointed to, but the ambient quality of the space had changed. There was a watching quality now, not directed at the speaker, not pointedly, just present. The way a room holds its breath when something is happening that no one can name. Bruce Lee had not moved. This was, by now, remarkable, not in any obvious sense. He had not frozen. He had not struck a pose. He had simply not moved, not in the way that people move when they are listening to someone, not with the small reactive movements of an engaged body, the slight nods, the almost imperceptible shifts in weight that signal reception and processing. He had been still in a way that had its own presence, its own gravity, a stillness that the room was now organized around, without anyone deciding to organize around it. The speaker said something about foundation. He said the foundation of any technique is the relationship between intention and structure. He said this and then said it slightly differently. The relationship between what you intend and how the body has been trained to enact that intention. His voice carried the clarity of someone who knows what they are saying, but underneath that clarity, running beneath it like a current in still water, there was something that was searching, not for ideas. He had the ideas, something else, something that needed to come back from outside him in order for the ideas to settle. Some confirmation that the shape of his thought corresponded to the shape of the room's understanding. That confirmation was not arriving. It was not being withheld. It was just not there. The silence on that side of the room was not a locked door. It was not a wall. It was simply an absence of the response that speech, in social space, typically generates. And the absence was complete, perfectly complete, without gap or variation or flicker of engagement. He tried again. He restated the foundational point from the very beginning. He walked it back to the first principle, briefly, and then moved through the progression again, this time more carefully, more slowly, as if the ideas had been understood but perhaps not clearly enough demonstrated, as if the architecture of his thinking required another pass before it could be seen fully. His voice was quieter now, not much, but lower. The way a voice gets lower when it is working harder, when it is lifting something. One of the others shifted weight from one foot to the other, a small movement, barely audible on the uneven wood. But it punctuated the sentence the speaker had been in the middle of, and he paused briefly, then resumed. His sentence had lost its shape by the time he returned to it. He completed it with slightly different words than he had begun it with. Bruce Lee was breathing. This was visible, now, only if you were watching closely enough. The slight rise and fall of his chest. Slow, regular, the breathing of someone at rest. Not the shallow breathing of someone suppressing reaction, Not the deliberate breathing of someone maintaining composure, just breath. The body doing what it does when it has no particular response to make. The speaker was describing something he had once witnessed. He had introduced the story without any clear announcement that he was doing so. It had arrived mid-sentence, the beginning of a concrete example, a thing he had seen, a practitioner, someone well known in certain circles, who had demonstrated something that had clarified the principle he had been discussing. He had seen it once, in a particular place, under particular conditions. The story gave him something to move through, a path through the room. He took it. His voice, in the story, recovered some of its earlier quality. The evenness came back, the measured pace. He was on surer ground in the story, in the specific, in the thing that had actually happened, in a place with texture and sequence. The story gave him walls, and in having walls, he was less aware of the vast, unresponsive openness to his side. He moved through the story. He described what the practitioner had done. He described the effect it had. He described what it had revealed. The story was good, it was clear, and it was specific, and it supported the point he was making. The story was doing its job. He reached the end of the story. The end arrived, and then the space after the end arrived, and in that space he was back in the room again. Without the story to move through, the unresponsive openness was still there. Nothing about it had changed. His mouth stayed slightly open for a moment after the final word. Not long. A fraction. The posture of a sentence that expected something to follow it. Then his lips came together, quietly. He looked at the room in general. He let his gaze move in a loose arc across the space. It crossed the area where Bruce Lee was standing. It did not stop there. It continued, to the window, to the floor, back to the middle of the room. He said, "So, just that." A transition word without a transition. The single word that a speaker places in front of whatever comes next. But nothing came next. He said so, and then the word sat there and he let it sit. Bruce Lee had not moved. Still, the speaker said, "In any case," also not followed. Also just placed in front of an empty space. His posture had changed. It had not changed dramatically. He had not sagged or retreated or shifted into any visible expression of discomfort. But the center of his presence had moved slightly, as if the column of attention that had been sustaining his upright engagement had shifted a degree or two. Not a collapse. A lean. A lean away from something, or a lean towards something smaller than the room. He was not done speaking. He was not going to simply stop. That was not available to him. He had been in the middle of something, and it required completion. But the something he had been in the middle of had become, in the last several minutes, less certain of itself. The edges of it had gone soft, and now he was speaking to hold the edges rather than to move through the interior. He said, "The principle holds regardless." He said this as a conclusion, as if everything he had been saying had been building to this, and now here it was. The principle holds regardless. He said it with the finality of someone who has decided that this is where the thing ends. Not because the thought is finished, but because the thought is as finished as it is going to get here, in this room, in this particular configuration of air and space and silence. His voice, saying it, was the quietest it had been, just above the level of the floor, just above the level of the flat afternoon light. It went out into the room and reached the people who were there, and then reached whatever was beyond them. Bruce Lee did not respond. There was nothing to respond to, or there was everything to respond to. There was an entire architecture of thought and language and experience that had been offered carefully into the air of this room, and none of it had generated a response. Not because the response had been withheld, not because the thought was unworthy of response, but because the silence had its own completeness. Because sometimes a thing does not require response, does not require agreement or disagreement, or the validation that turns a thought from something offered into something received. Sometimes a thing is simply heard or not heard, and the difference between those two possibilities is impossible to determine from the outside. The speaker understood something, not consciously, not in a way he could have described if asked, but something in him reorganized, quietly, without announcement. The way a body reorganizes its weight when it realizes the surface it is standing on is not quite what it thought it was. He stopped talking, not dramatically, not with any obvious sign that he was stopping. He simply did not say the next thing, the space where the next thing would have been arrived, and he let it arrive, and he let it stay empty. The room held that. The others were there, and they were quiet, and no one said anything. No one looked at anyone else in a pointed way. No one filled the space with a question or a comment, or a small social sound that might smooth over the roughness of the ending. They were just there. In a room where a person had been speaking and had stopped speaking, and Bruce Lee had said nothing. Bruce Lee had not moved. He was standing in the same place, with the same quality of stillness, looking at the same unfocused middle distance, breathing in the same slow, invisible way. His expression, if you could call it that, was unchanged. It had never been set at any particular thing. It had been open, and it was open still. But the openness was not inviting, and it was not rejecting, and it was not anything that could be identified and named and used. The afternoon light in the room had shifted very slightly. The window had moved the shadow on the floor by a small amount. The light was still flat, still even, but it was a different flatness now, the kind that comes an hour later, the kind that makes you aware of time having passed. The speaker turned slightly, not away, not a departure, just an adjustment, a change in orientation that moved him a few degrees off the axis he had been holding. His shoulders lowered, his breath came in, came out. He looked at the floor briefly, then at the wall, then at nothing specific. He did not look at Bruce Lee again, not because he was avoiding it, not consciously, but the looking had stopped. The looking that had been part of the speaking, the checking, the waiting that looking had run its course. And now there was nothing to check for. Somewhere outside the room, a sound, distant, passing, briefly present, and then gone. The room absorbed it. No one spoke. Bruce Lee remained still, and the moment, which had not been a confrontation, which had not been a lesson, which had not been an exchange in any form that could be pointed to or described or accounted for, that moment simply continued, the way moments do when nothing ends them, when they are allowed to hold their shape until the shape becomes unnecessary and releases on its own. The speaker was still in the room, still standing, still himself in every visible sense. And something had changed in the most interior sense, in the place before language, in the space where certainty lives before it has been tested by the texture of the world. He had expected something. He had not known he was expecting it. But expectation does not require awareness to exist. It works in the body, in the rhythm of the voice and the timing of the breath and the direction of the eyes. He had been expecting something, and nothing had come, and the nothing had kept not coming, and the kept not coming had done something to the inside of the expecting, not broken it, not corrected it, just made it aware of itself. The way you become aware of a tension in the shoulder only after it releases. He had been holding something he had not known he was holding, and now the holding had become visible, and the visible thing was uncertainty, and the uncertainty was his. Bruce Lee said nothing, and in saying nothing, had said something that could not be unsaid, had done something that could not be undone, not through confrontation, not through challenge, not through the force of any position or argument or expertise, through stillness, through the absence of the reaction that presence typically generates, through presence without concession. That was it. That was the thing that was happening and had been happening the entire time, without announcement or explanation or the courtesy of a name. Presence without concession. A person who was entirely there, entirely receiving whatever the room contained, and entirely unmoved by it. Not in the sense of cold or unreachable or closed, in the sense of centered, of having a center that was not negotiable, that did not expand or contract in response to what was offered. That remained the size it was, regardless of the size of what was offered to it. And that was the thing, finally. That was why the silence had weight. Because silence from a centered person is not empty silence. It is not the silence of absence or inattention or disinterest. It is the silence of something fully present and entirely sufficient unto itself. It does not need to respond, because it does not need to be more than it is. And when something that does not need to be more than it is sits in the same room as something that is continuously trying to become more than it currently is, the contrast, though invisible, is total, and the thing trying to become more than it is eventually feels it, not hears it, not sees it, feels it, in the structure of its sentences and the rhythm of its breath and the direction of its gaze. And the room knows, not with understanding, not with analysis, just with the body's knowledge, the room's animal awareness of weight and absence, and the thing that happens when what is expected does not arrive. The speaker was quiet. He had been quiet for a while now, long enough that the quiet had become part of the room rather than an interruption of it. He was standing in the same place, mostly. His weight had shifted once, almost imperceptibly, but it had shifted, and his hands were still. They had been moving throughout, small movements, the hands of someone speaking, and now they were still at his sides. Bruce Lee had not moved, would not move for some time yet, was not thinking about moving, was simply in a room, where a person had spoken for a while, and where the speaking had run its course, and where now there was the quiet that comes after, the ordinary quiet of a space between one moment and the next. Nothing had happened. Everything had happened. The light on the floor was as it was. The others in the room were as they were. The uneven wood held the sound the same way, in the same places. The afternoon continued outside the window, without interest in what the window looked onto. And somewhere inside the speaker, in the place before language, in the space where certainty lives and sometimes does not survive contact with the world somewhere there, something was different now. Not gone, not replaced, just different. In the way that a room is different when a window has been opened and then closed again, when no air can be pointed to as having entered. But something is not the same as it was. Something at the level of the air itself has shifted, and you would not be able to explain it to someone who had not been there. Bruce Lee breathed. The room breathed. And the moment, without closing, became the next moment, and the next, and the afternoon held them all in its flat and even and indifferent light.